Okay, welcome everyone to the Pantheon 1.2 Evolving Enterprise Ethereum webinar. And so this webinar is timed to coincide with the release of Pantheon 1.2, which is going to be happening in a couple of hours' time at the time of recording this. So that's on the, for me in Australia, it's on the 1st of August. For people that are not quite caught up with the Australians, that'll be on the 31st of July. So looking at this here, today we'll be presenting about the 1.2, sort of some of the exciting things that are happening there. The presenters will be myself, Rob Dawson, the product lead for Pegasus. And then I'll be joined by Adrian Sutton and Joshua Fernandez, who are both blockchain protocol engineers working very heavily with the, I guess, running Pantheon in production sort of environments. And so they'll be doing a couple of awesome demos towards the end of this webinar. Definitely hang around for their presentations. It's actually the high points of things. Seeing them show some stuff off is really great, and there's some really good things to be seeing there. Before I get to the friendly reminders, I'll give us an agenda. So we're going to start off by doing a quick introduction to Pantheon and talk about what's new in our 1.2 release at a sort of very high level, and then do a bit of a deep dive, looking at some of the permissioning features, the privacy, so some of those are our sort of big enterprise features, looking at some of the community-driven improvements that we've got happening, and then talking about how you can work well with things in production. And so in our production sort of made easy section, the two demos that we will be doing that are really worth looking at are Ansible for deployment and how that sort of works, what we've got happening with Ansible. And the second is looking at some of our Prometheus and Grafana sort of work and what you can see there. And Adrian, I believe he has things set up so that you can actually see how he would use Grafana to analyze a network that's gone bad. And so it's a really sort of interesting sort of demo that I think is a really great one to have a look at and get a feel for how you can use the monitoring tools in a general sort of sense, and then how they can actually be used in a real sort of problem. Finally, then we'll finish up with what's on the horizon. So looking at the bigger picture roadmap for 2019 and 2020, which is actually only about 6 months away, and then finishing up with some extra Q&A. As we go through, though, we will pause at numerous times for questions, and we have people monitoring the chat who will be collecting your questions and reading them out as well. So as we start, just a couple of friendly reminders and housekeeping rules. First of all, please mute. It looks like everyone that I can see is muted, so thank you. But if you're not muted, please mute when you're not speaking or asking questions. Please definitely go ahead and ask questions in the chat whenever they come to your mind, and there'll be people who are monitoring, and they will raise them up and speak them out for us. Again, we'll be pausing after sections and giving time for questions, and then finishing up with QA at the end. We want to have a bit of interaction and not just have us rambling things out to you. Please do ask your questions. The final thing is that we are recording this session, and we will send the recording and materials out in an email. We also love feedback. So if you see anything that you think that we could do better, or things that you loved, both positive and negative feedback, we'd love to hear it and see how we can improve and keep on doing better and giving this information in a better way for you. With that, let's get started. So the first thing to say is Pantheon is enterprise Ethereum. We think that our client is great in the way that you should be thinking about and working with enterprise Ethereum. And what does that mean? We've got the sort of big sort of bucket areas. So first of all, the enterprise sort of use cases. So we have made sure that we've got enterprise grade quality software, that it's really solid, robust, that we think it's great for you to be using in production environments. And then also there's some extra features that are important for enterprises. So being able to have private transactions and have privacy that works for some interesting use cases, being able to have consortiums, both big and small, that works well, and having software that works well for that, having extra security features and enterprise security features hooking into your enterprise systems. The next thing is, I guess, the thing that's interesting about it is we've got Ethereum. And so Ethereum being that really great platform, I think probably most of you here that are listening to me talk now know what Ethereum is and why it's awesome. So I won't dive into the details of that, but you can see there's some good things on that slide there. The other thing about Pantheon is that it's open source. And so just two parts to that open source. First is just being open source, I think, is really important for any blockchain client to be able to make sure that you can sort of do the analysis and see that it's doing what it's meant to be doing. The other thing that we've got with our particular flavor of open source is that we use an Apache 2 license, which is a very friendly license for enterprises and large organizations. So sometimes the license that software is made under can make a difference when putting it through the legal team in larger corporate environments. Apache 2 is definitely a license that is loved by all. The other thing with our sort of work and our enterprise Ethereum is that we are building the tooling to help make sure that it works really well for you in your enterprise environments. And so we'll be showing off some of the deployment-related tooling around that later on, and some of the monitoring tooling as well. Let's have a quick look at some of those high-level features for Pantheon and what's sort of coming in 1.2 and what we'll be talking about into a little bit more detail later. First of all, our permissioning functionality. So we have been doing a really sort of bunch of great work there. And when I say we, I mean the team and not really me personally. They've been doing a bunch of really, really good work in building a permissioning system that works well now and also provides a great platform for people to be able to do interesting things on it. So there's a DApp that's there, there's account and whitelisting, there's node whitelisting, the ability to sort of control things that are happening there within your permissioning models. The other thing that's really exciting is that the infrastructure that they're building is also the base for more advanced permissioning models with advanced RBAC and interesting governance models, and all those things are very possible to be built on top of the foundations which have been laid in the permissioning model that is there now. And so it's a great permissioning system right now, and it's also a great permissioning system that will enable, if you are building a consortium network, that you want to start off using the permissioning model, which is a single place now, and then as your network grows, you might want to add in the ability to vote in members or have super admins or have some sort of super majority that applies for some rules around your permissioning model. The model that is there and built into Pantheon supports being upgraded and working in those sorts of ways. Our privacy functionality. So we released the privacy functionality in our 1.1 release, and so I'll talk to this a little bit more, but it is a good thing in 1.1 that provides the idea of off-chain transactions or off-chain privacy, so that the private transactions are only sent to the parties that are involved in the transaction, with a marker that a private transaction has happened, being written to the public chain. So that was released in our 1.1 release. In our 1.2 release, we're doing an iteration on top of that. One of the concepts that we had in 1.1 that was behind the scenes very much was the idea of a privacy group. We are exposing that into the API in 1.2, which will then be used in bigger ways in future releases as well. Our third thing to really highlight for our 1.2 features for consortium networks in particular is our security work. And so we have for a long time said that doing the key management inside of an Ethereum client is not the right place for it. And so we have deliberately not implemented the APIs that require key management in the client. But as we've been working through that, we've also realized more and more the importance of being able to actually use those APIs that people have already built applications on top of. And so we've created an extra component, which we're calling ETH Signer, which not surprisingly does transaction signing. And that component there is something that works really well with the Pantheon client. The that helps provide that security, that separation of concerns that's really important in enterprise systems, while keeping the ability to keep your systems built the way that you would build them for other Ethereum clients. So that's the top level of our 1.2. And let me just briefly touch on where we are. And I will go into this slide again towards the end of the presentation, but it just gives you that little bit of context where we are right now. And so you can see there's the that Pantheon 1.1 release, which is available now for people to use. We've got the Pantheon 1.2 release, which is happening today in a couple of hours' time. And then we've got the Pantheon 1.3 release, which is scheduled to be coming out for just before DevCon. And then looking forward to that ongoing sort of periodic releases that will be happening throughout 2020. So if you look at that sort of heartbeat of releases that we have, it sits on the that 2 to 3 month kind of window is where we are aiming to have our releases. So about once every quarter. I already talked a little bit about our permissioning. I'm going to just quickly show you some of the way that looks. So within our permissioning functionality, we've got a DApp for managing it. So it's sort of a web-based application, which is actually really easy to use. There's a great webinar that was released recently. And so you should go to our documentation site or sign up to our mailing lists and be able to find out and keep on top of the webinars that we've got happening. So that DApp is really sort of easy to use. If you go to the other webinar, you'll see us walking through that. And it's for sort of adding and removing the whitelisted nodes and accounts. The next thing that we have with that sort of DApp is that it's sort of there for maintaining our smart contract-based network permissioning. And so, you know, the DApp and smart contracts clearly sort of go really well together. And that then is also good for being able to do really fine-grained permissioning on the account level. The transactions that you're sending to accounts, you can control that in a very fine-grained manner. The other thing that we provide is, along with the ability to do that very strong node and account-based permissioning at the protocol layer, we also provide permissioning around our JSON RPC APIs. So providing a simple JWT authentication sort of system, and then authorization on the all of our JSON RPC endpoints. That's the permissioning feature that we've got. Our privacy groups. And we can talk a little bit about where they are and where they're headed. So we've got Orion as our private transaction manager. So if someone sends a transaction to their Pantheon node, they have it marked as a private transaction, it will then interact with Orion to only send it to the other parties that are involved in that private transaction. There'll be a record of that private transaction written to the public chain. That will be, as we move forward, be able to be very much set up to be anonymized so that you can see that there was a transaction happened, but you don't know who was a part of it. And then the person who actually sent that private transaction will be able to attest that here's the payload that was used for that. So within our privacy groups, we can talk about what's sort of new in 1.2. And so that private transaction support that we had, I was showing in the previous slide with Orion sitting there, is backed by the idea of a privacy group. And so a privacy group is the group of parties that are involved in a private transaction. So we've got two different privacy groups that we're seeing here, privacy group A and B. That is currently sitting in and has been backing our system for 1.1. Now in 1.2, what we're doing is we're beginning to expose this more and more through our APIs. So in 1.1, it was a implicit privacy group sitting there. You would send a transaction to a list of parties, and it would implicitly create the privacy group or use an existing one. In 1.2, what you can do is you can create a specific named privacy group. which gives you that sort of, okay, this privacy group is for a particular purpose. The contracts and state for that purpose will be kept separate from any other privacy groups. That's pretty cool. The thing that gets to be more and more exciting is the named privacy groups. Then in 1.3, as we sort of move forward, you'll be able to update the membership of a privacy group as well. So being able to add or remove members from a privacy group. And so that then makes these named privacy groups a really powerful feature for being able to have the privacy abstracted from that specific who was involved in that group. I will take a moment and I will pause for questions.
Looks like we have one question, Rob. Are you planning for privacy groups to be public chain compatible?
That's an excellent question. The public chain compatibility is definitely something that we have always had in our minds with our privacy groups. And so the design that we have for it does lean towards a public chain compatibility. We have one or two areas that we do need to iron out. So one of the quirks that is there in a public chain world which isn't there in a permissioned chain using a consensus mechanism that provides block finality, is that when you start to go to the public chain, you need to think more and more about how chain reorgs work. And so thinking about how consensus and keeping the states of the private transactions in sync. And so that's functionality that we are currently in the design around for how to make the privacy groups work well through a chain reorg. And once we get some designs in place, so we have some good sort of ideas that are kicking around at the moment, we will then move towards the implementation of that. And so our loose goal, without making a strong commitment, is that this will be something that will be available in one of our early releases next year. We'll be having our privacy groups working on mainnet.
Great, very cool. Doesn't look like we have any other questions, so I think you can keep moving.
Great. The next area that we want to touch on is some of our community-driven improvements. And so we mentioned earlier on that we're open source. This plays out for us in two different ways. One is we work closely with the community to see here new things that they'd like to see in our client. And the other thing is we actually are engaging with other groups and other organizations and other individual contributors that then end up contributing code back to the Pantheon product. And so I'll be talking about some of each of those areas here within this community-driven improvement section. The first one to talk on is GraphQL. So this is a new way of being able to interact with our chain. Gives a great read-only interface into a chain. Some of the advantages and why we thought that GraphQL would be really useful. The first is, somewhat flippant, that it's one of the cool technologies that web developers like to use, but less flippantly, it's a really sort of great way of being able to pull information out and to be able to interact and query the information about your client. The other thing that's really important and really useful with GraphQL is that there's the standard sort of base for it. And so there's the EAT that's sitting there for talking about how to do that with an Ethereum, use GraphQL within Ethereum. And so we've implemented that EAT. The other part of that that's really interesting from a standards perspective is that that means that all of the GraphQL tooling and community that knows how GraphQL works will be able to use that and work within a Ethereum setup. And so that means that things like the GraphQL tool are able to work. And I'm going to just quickly flip across and show you that working now, if I get this right. There we go. So here we go. We're looking at the GraphQL browser here. And so it's a very simple sort of tool for being able to run GraphQL queries. I have a few different things that I've saved and that we can run. So the first is just being able to see the latest block number. So if I run that, you can see that I'm talking to a live network. The block number is increasing. So then we can start to see maybe there's an interesting thing. I believe I'm running an IBFT network. So being able to go to the first block and be able to get the extra data out is actually really useful for then being able to configure another client and think about how it's working. I can then hop in and start to look at, here we go, we're looking at my private network. I wish I had that much ETH in an account, but that's a really well-funded account there that's been used for testing. I'll go across and just have a look at some of the transactions in some of the early blocks. And you can see that, there's not a lot of traffic happening on this. Occasionally you'll start to see that there's a couple of transactions that are starting to sit there as well. So just kind of highlighting some of the very simple things that you can do with the GraphQL interface into our Ethereum client. I'm not doing too much magic, but you can just start to, I guess, get a bit of a vision for how you could write some queries to start to query the way that you would want to see it. The interesting thing here is just that ability to start to see, I guess, particular pieces of information and mine out the bits of data that you want to have. And so this is the GraphQL interface. I think it's a great way for being able to query a chain, and that's one of the things that we are including new in our 1.2 release. Another area that we've had great work coming in around the community is doing some networking improvements. And so I want to flag here with our UPnP support. And so making it work well making Pantheon work well in sort of the home network type environments where you're sitting behind your local router that's probably running UPnP. You want to make it so that your node is able to be accessed outside of your local network. The other thing that that was a feature that was actually done by the community, and we actually created a bounty for that, which was sitting on Gitcoin. And so if you're a coder and you want to do some contribution toward Pantheon, you should go have a look at Gitcoin. You'll see that there's a number of bounties that we have sitting out there open at the moment. The other thing that we have that's really interesting around our networking improvements that'll be useful again is providing NAT traversal for, I guess, organizations that are running a consortium that's going across the internet and using maybe VPNs and all of the advanced network security type features. Being able to have NAT traversal to help cross those networks is really useful. And so these are the sort of areas where we're looking at improving our networking and making it so that the connectivity of Pantheon works better and better. We've also done a number of core improvements. I think in the ad for the webinar, we talked about having support for the Istanbul hard fork. It's coming soon. We will support Istanbul as soon as Istanbul gets finalized. I think is maybe not as soon, but as soon as Istanbul gets finalized, we'll be able to do the last couple of bits of implementation work and ensure that we're supporting that in a timely fashion. Another thing that we wanted to flag just really briefly is that we've added support for the revert reason in transaction receipts. So that's being able to support, there's the revert opcode within the EVM, which the Solidity require and revert statements use. That opcode, you can provide it with a parameter, which is like a string message as a part of that. So we've made sure that we support exposing that information through transaction receipts. And so we're the first client to be able to do that. And I think that's actually just a really useful feature for people that are rebuilding their dApp and want to make sure that actually we're going to give some well-designed Solidity code that gives really good require messages and revert reasons as you're building your app. You want to actually be able to expose that out through your interfaces and make that a useful piece of information. And so by making it available through the transaction receipt, we're providing that detail. So those are some of the I guess, high-level things that we've been doing within our community features. Again, I will pause briefly for questions.
Rob, sorry, my connection's a little funny. It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat right now. Maybe give them just a minute to see if they come through.
Sure.
Okay, I think we're free to keep moving then if no questions.
Sure, I'd love to keep moving. We could have a little dance party, but I don't know if that's quite the vibe that we're going for just at the moment. So the next thing that we want to look at is, and this is, I think, some of the more interesting things that we've got happening at the moment is making sure that production is easy and making it really easy to work with Pantheon in a production environment. And so the first part of that we want to talk about is our deployment being made easy. And so that fits into sort of three big areas that we've been doing a bunch of interesting work on. The first is Ansible, second Docker, and the third Kubernetes. So I'll do that in the exact wrong order. So I'll start talking about Docker. So our Docker environment, we've been running on Docker and had Docker images available for a long period of time. We've done some good work to improve that based on feedback from the community. So the approach that we initially had was to have a sort of entry point script which constrained the ability of things that you could do in your Docker environment. We've now opened that up and made it so that it's more exposing more of the underlying functionalities of Pantheon. And so with that improvement, there'll be a migration if you're using Docker in the past, and we've got some information that's well documented about how to do that migration work. The next one, and I said I was going to do it in the exact wrong order, I'll go to Kubernetes next. And so Kubernetes, we've released a series of Helm files around that. We've got ongoing work there that we would love to get your feedback on. If you're using Kubernetes, please reach out to us and we will help make sure that we're building the Helm files in the right way to work well for you. And we'd love to help support you in getting a really good Pantheon in Kubernetes environment running. The final one that I want to touch on right now is Ansible. And I want to touch on Ansible in this sort of third spot because Joshua is going to do a demo for that of our Ansible functionality. And so our Ansible is available on Galaxy for you to be able to download and interact with. It provides a whole bunch of sort of features there that make this a really great way for being able to get Pantheon working well in your production environments. So we support systemd with our Ansible scripts. We support all the different cloud providers, and it works great in a number of environments. The other thing that I'm sort of wanting to flag with our Ansible setup is that it's how we're dog fooding our deployments internally within Pegasus. And so we have a number of versions of Pantheon that are running. A number of them are running against mainnet, and we now deploy those and manage those using Ansible, using these deployment scripts. And we found them to be a really great way of getting Pantheon running well on the sort of bare metal environments, or at least as bare metal as you get in a cloud sort of world. So I am going to now hand over to Josh, who is going to talk to you about it. So I'll stop sharing and let Joshua be able to share his screen.
Cool, thank you, Rob. So, hi everybody. So I'll do a quick, so before we get into the demo itself, I'll touch on a few things. So we've aimed the Galaxy role to be focused for developers. So when they're developing things and they want to test things. So one of the things we built in is OS X support. So if you want to spin this up on your local box, it should be very simple to do, and that's what we believe in. So secondly, we've also targeted this at people in the operation space, so be able to set this up on any given network, be able to roll out updates, do things like log rotate, and do all the nifty little things that make life just that little bit easier. So another thing that we also do is, so this is the Galaxy page that we've got Pantheon on. Now, if you've run stuff up and you're building things on your local environment and you're pushing it to a private repo, What you can do is you can override this variable over there, and you can say spin it up from that place rather than from the public bin tray that we use. So all the options that you have are fully documented here, and you can override as much as you want. And we'll just quickly jump into demo. So what I've got here is a basic EC2 machine. The only thing that I've set it up with is Java 11. So anything that has systemd, you're perfectly free to run, and you get startup scripts that go up, down, restarts, do all the 9 yards magic over there. So the first thing what we'll do is, very much like the documentation says, is we will install the role from Galaxy, like so. Next thing we'll do is we'll create a file. So I'll just open up one that I've created, which has all the basic requirements in there. So I'm running this on my local machine. That's the role, and I'm overriding 1var, which is the version number itself. So you can do that there, or you can specify extra vars and provide that at runtime. And after that, it is pretty much just running it up. And that should set everything up for you. Right, so as we go through this, it'll take care of creating directories, creating log files, everything else. And so then if I go into my log directory, I can see I've got it up and running and it's waiting to connect. And when you're doing updates and things like that, it's very simple to go ahead and do it. It'll go and stop the service, install the new version, and then bring it up again. And I think that's about it. So I'll hand this back to Rob now.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh.
All right.
And I will get back to sharing my screen. The other thing that that we think is very important within a production environment is being able to understand what's happening with your network, and having the appropriate monitoring tooling in place to be able to see things. We have two sides of that we're going to be looking at today, and focusing more on the visual side, because that's what you're going to see in a demo and look good. The other part of it, though, is actually exposing the information out. And so we use Prometheus as the way that we expose our metrics. We've implemented the EAP 2159 compliant metric names, which sort of specify out a standard set of names for your metrics to help make sure that if you're connecting into one client and start using one client, that you'll be able to get the same sort of consistent metrics across multiple different clients in your world. The thing that we've been doing is really making sure that we make as much information and appropriate information available for being able to understand your network using Prometheus. As we've been building and testing ourselves, anytime we hit a problem, we try and think about what metrics should we be adding to help make it so that we can understand what's been happening with it, as well as doing all of the changes to make sure that the system's more and more robust. So we've been able to use Prometheus now to, whenever we see something that goes wrong, it'll be the Prometheus will be where we sort of start to do it. And Adrian will be showing us some of that in a moment with the demo. The other thing there that we've got is we've chosen Prometheus as our metric system because that's where the community and the world is leading at the moment. We've also done our implementation of that in a way that makes it quite viable and not trivial, but straightforward to be able to add in support for other standards and other metric systems as well. And so if there's a specific requirement that you might have for your own network, you say, Prometheus, I hate Prometheus, I want to use something else, then we would be able to work with you to help make that happen. So I guess talking about then Prometheus, the other side of it is the visualization. Grafana is a great tool for working with Prometheus. And so we've got a dashboard that we've made available on the Grafana website for that. And that provides some of the, I guess, initial good visualizations and is the starting point for what Adrian will be showing us. The other thing with all of our Prometheus and Grafana, and actually with everything within Pantheon, we have a really, really great documentation team. And so our documentation for how to set this up and get it going is actually really great. And so you should look at that to be able to understand that and get it going on your own network and your own systems. So with that sort of introduction, I'm going to hand over to Adrian, who is going to share with us how to get some Grafana and Prometheus going.
Great, thanks, Rob. So what I'm going to take us through first is firstly a dashboard that actually works. And really, I want to take you through how we can look at these dashboards, firstly in terms of just finding out, are things okay? Getting a quick status check so that if you've got a crazy early webinar like 5:30 in the morning, something that's near and dear to my heart at the moment, you can wake up just moments before and look and see that the network is up and running, everything's progressing well. But then I want to show you how we can dig into the metrics a bit more and resolve any issues that are there. So this first screen is our healthy network. These are our actual production nodes. And you can see we've got actually a mix of networks that we've run on. We want to make sure that Pantheon's tracking all of them. So I've got a couple of mainnet nodes, a Ring2B node, a Ropsten node, and we actually run a Goerli validator. So that one's actually particularly important because the network depends on us. So we can see from this first table lots of green. That's what we want to see. We can see that we have plenty of peers. They're all connected up to their peer limit. You can see blocks coming in regularly, and most importantly, they're not trailing behind. They're all caught up to the head of the network. And this top table here is the one that's really driven by the standard names that we've put into that EIP that Rob mentioned. We're really keen for other clients to pick that up, and so that you can then have lots of different clients all appearing in this table with the same information and easy to track and see. It's worth mentioning as well, this is a really good kind of UI for Pantheon in many ways. If nodes are starting to sync, you can see them as they catch up during a full sync in this top table. And if you're doing a fast sync, they'll appear in this second table automatically. And you can see the progress of downloading the world state and things like that. So as we go down, we can see a bit more detail. First of all, we'll look at this blocks behind. You can see it spikes up to 1 occasionally. That's okay. That's keeping up well with the network. You've obviously got to find out that a block exists before you can import it. So occasionally, depending on when the sample happens, we'll see that it spikes up to 1. 2 or 3 is probably okay. We don't want to see it too often. But if it starts going up beyond that, then we've got a real problem we want to investigate. The block time is an interesting one. You can see that at some point this morning, something on Ropsten, that's this red line, has not gone particularly well. Block time's up just over 2 minutes. It is early in the morning, and I have just rolled out of bed, so I haven't investigated why that is. It could be that we didn't have good connections to nodes for a point, and that happens sometimes on the Ropsten network. It could also be that a couple of miners dropped out on Ropsten, and so the network actually stalled, and that happens occasionally as well. So sometimes it's not so much a full outage these metrics highlight, but a partial one or some early warning signs that there are issues. We can see that our CPU usage is lots of up and down, lots of spikiness. That's actually what I want to see. If it was completely maxing out the CPU and there was no headroom left, then that would be a flat line because it's using every bit of CPU and there's no more room to grow. Most of the nodes are using incredibly little. Mainnet's a lot busier, tons and tons of transactions around there, which require validation and sending across. And then in terms of memory, if we look at particularly like one of the mainnet nodes to see it a bit more clearly, I can focus in on that. And we see this spiky kind of approach again. That's really typical of a healthy Java application. Because it's garbage collected, you'll see it increase in memory to a degree, and then the garbage collector kicks in and drops down. What we don't want to see is that constantly growing, and we don't want to see it being too flat. Obviously, if it's really low, sometimes it will be. This one's less spiky down the bottom, this green one, than others. But that sawtooth kind of pattern is really typical and good for a Java one. But then the big one is this garbage collection time. We want it down nice and flat, just like it is. When we start running out of memory and we need to allocate more, we'll start seeing that GC time increasing, and particularly when it's up around 100%, you're spending all your time garbage collecting, and that's really, there's just not enough memory to function. So these are really useful in terms of sizing your box. If you're spinning up a network, the requirements you need depend a lot on what's going on in the network, which you can see very clearly here with the mainnet CPU higher, the mainnet memory tending to be higher, and something like Goerli being much lower. It's because of the amount of things running through the network that adjusts how much hardware you need. If we flick over to this other instance of Grafana that I've got here, this is basically our torture chamber for Ethereum nodes. This is where as developers would run up and do lots and lots of tests. And I've actually gone back in time a little because conveniently, just as I was about to prep for this demo and wondering how I'd show it off, one of these nodes went red. And we can see that it was a long time between blocks. It's fallen a long way behind the chain head. We want to find out why. What's going on? So if we work down those same graphs, we can see blocks behind just constantly increasing. This looks like it's just not importing any blocks. And we can see that confirmed by the sudden stop in block time. It was ticking along perfectly happily here. And then all of a sudden, nothing. So it hasn't gradually gotten worse. It hasn't degraded over time. Just at some point, the block stopped. But we can see that it was fully connected. It's still got 25 peers. It knows there are better blocks out there. The difference between here and the fact that it knows it's behind. But for some reason, it can't import any blocks. If we look at CPU, I told you this was a torture chamber, and we are hitting this box really hard with loads of JSON RPC requests and keeping it really busy. But that hasn't changed. So we can see this is just after 12 that our blocks started falling behind. Similarly on this graph, there's a slight change. You can see we don't have these little dips occasionally when we're not thrashing it as hard. It's busier now, but it doesn't look like a real CPU change. It was always fairly CPU limited, this box. Doesn't have a lot to start with, and we're hitting it pretty hard. Again, if we look at memory, pretty normal sawtooth pattern. It hasn't grown out of control. Garbage collection is up slight. That's higher than I'd like to see it, but it's not unreasonable. It's only 4% of the time. It hasn't run out of memory by any means. Now, they're the stats we get out of Pantheon, and I've actually seen this one before, so I realized I should go onto the box and look at the Pantheon logs, and it promptly told me, actually, I'm out of disk space. I really should have been monitoring that the whole time. One of the nice things about using Prometheus is that we don't have to just take the data that Pantheon exposes. There are a whole range of different applications and servers that can export metrics off to Prometheus. So I've installed the Node Exporter program, which goes into Linux and grabs loads of information about the system and pushes that out to Grafana. And most importantly, it's highlighting the disk space used here. So if we have a look, these are all the same box. I've only installed on one at the moment. Mount Pantheon disk space is 99% used. So it just doesn't have space to write, and that's why it's run out. Now, it's great that I've got this graph here. I can see that clearly. When I go and fix it and clear up some space or increase the disk space available, I'll see that drop, and I can check every day and come back and check that my disk hasn't run out again. But that's a lot of work, and I'm pretty lazy. So instead, what I really want is to be able to be told to have alerts raised if disk space is low, or I can do that for a range of things. If garbage collection starts getting too high, I could add an alert. There's a couple of ways you can do that. One is in Prometheus, there's an alert manager, and it's got quite an advanced set of configuration, loads of options, very powerful. But it's also editing config files and kind of boring for a demo. The second way is much more near and dear to my heart as a Mac user who was a long-time Mac user. I was using a Mac before, it was cool. I'm going to do it the graphical way in Grafana because it has support for alerting as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this graph. And firstly, we can see the query that I'm using. I can get the available bytes and file system bytes. There's loads of things we can go through here. And it's probably worth noting that there's actually really helpful completion. So if I'm not sure what the metric name is, I can start typing and have a few guesses and it'll suggest one. I'm going to come down into the alert settings. I'm going to create an alert. And it's pretty simple to do. When my disk space used, we're going to evaluate every minute. And if for 5 minutes we're above a certain value, so average winds up above, we're going to say 75%. And you can see on the graph, we get this nice red line that shows below that's healthy, above that's not. Really clear to see when you're even getting close to it if you're looking at the graph. And then the notifications that come out of Grafana can be sent in quite a few different ways, to Slack, to PagerDuty, lots of different systems. In this case, I'm just using email. So I can put in an address and a message that I might want if I can type properly. Now I've got an alert all set up, ready to go. In fact, I'll get an email in a moment when I save this. It'll tell me now when disk space is too high, and I can do something about it. So using these tools gives us a really powerful way to keep an eye on our systems to make sure that the network's running and progressing, both for the individual nodes, but also with the block time graphs here, we can see, is my network progressing or has it stalled? If I lose too many validators on proof of authority, for example, or my mine is down on ethash, we don't want to see it stall. And doing that, we can run a really professional, high quality network, make sure our nodes have the kind of uptime and reliability that we'd be looking for. And so I'll hand back to Rob.
Great. Thank you, Adrian, and thank you for that great demo. I'm going to give us a chance for any questions that people might have around things that we've had so far.
So it looks like we have one question here. I know we're wrapping up on time quickly, but for the rest of the group, we'll be just taking a couple questions, maybe a wrap-up slide to kind of tell where we're going, and then we'll take additional questions. But anyway, so Madeline has this question. Why would you use FastSync? Maybe this is a question for Adrian.
Yeah, so FastSync is just a quicker way of getting in sync with the network. Doing a full sync, you wind up reprocessing every single transaction that's ever been on the network. And for mainnet, that's a lot of transactions in a very long time. So FastSync is just a faster way to skip processing all those transactions, downloads the world state much closer to train head, and gets you in sync a lot quicker, so you're up and running.
Any other questions? Looks like we can wrap up and then take the rest of them.
Great. So just to wrap up, we're going to talk briefly about what's on the horizon for Pantheon in 2019 and 2020. So we've got the 1.2 release, which we've been talking about. That's happening in a couple of hours' time. And then that's going to be followed with a 1.3 release that we've got scheduled for, probably not surprisingly, just before DevCon. And so our DevCon release, some of the big things there are very much around the enterprise. We've got listed, so supporting streams. So by streams, it's kind of integration with Kafka or Kinesis to be able to subscribe to the events around transactions and your chain, using those sort of more, I guess, reliable connection systems rather than subscribing over HTTP. Looking at support for encryption of your data at rest. So in an enterprise context, it might be useful to make sure that your actual chain data is being encrypted. The next thing that we're looking at is adding more support for monitoring. So Adrian did a great job of showing off what we're looking like at the moment, adding in some extra things, particularly around the permissioned type networks. Within our permissioning, adding in support for governance and continuing to iterate on that roadmap. And then one of the features that's sort of exciting around that enterprise use case is being able to modify the privacy groups. And I think that is sort of suite of features gives us a really great 1.3. The other things that we're looking at on a sort of core sort of infrastructure side, so we already talked about extending the networking to try and think about that NAT traversal. Other things there, being able to support within the fast sync, the thing that you sort of partner with it. So Adrian was talking about how it's great for catching up with the network quickly. The other thing that works well in that sort of world is being able to prune the network. So not only making sure that you catch up quickly, but then as the world moves on, not keeping track of all the history. And so that state pruning will be something that we ship as a part of 1.3 as well as some more sort of, I guess, our ongoing performance improvements and enhancements to the core client. Then as we look beyond our 1.3, some continuing iterations and improvements on the core client will be happening. So that additional growing enterprise support, being able to connect into other systems and integrate with the rest of your environment. The privacy solution, as the question was asked earlier, will this privacy work on mainnet? And so that's definitely on our roadmap and something that we're working towards. It wasn't just me typing in the background to get that into our roadmap. That is something that's definitely there for looking at getting that into our releases early next year. The other thing then within our privacy groups, sort of beyond that, we'll be looking at how we can get some cross-privacy group communication happening and other privacy features there. So we've seen very strongly that within an enterprise context, being able to have privacy is really important, and that there's a number of different privacy solutions that are needed in a consortium type setup. And so we're looking at doing both our Orion sort of restricted setup that we've got at the moment, as well as supporting a number of other use cases and systems as well. Another thing that we're just to sort of cover off towards that end of that list is the support for a multi-Ethereum networks in the same client. And so that's being able to say, okay, within my same Java processes that are running for an Ethereum client, having it talk to mainnet and talk to maybe your consortium network in that same process. And so we think that that's a sort of core enabling bit of technology that's going to help make it easier to start to enable that future where you've got side chains and multiple different chains that are being pinned into different networks and working together. So the first step in that journey, the first couple of steps in that journey are that privacy groups that we've got and being able to potentially have cross-privacy group communication. And then the other thing is being able to say, okay, within our client, being able to talk to multiple different Ethereum networks. So those are the big things that we're looking at into 2019 and 2020. And I think with that, I will say that we've covered what's happening in 1.2, given you a flavor for what's happening in 1.3 and beyond. And so that's the key things that we wanted to cover off in this webinar. We'll pause now for questions, and yeah, love to get any feedback that you have. Before we do that, please do go ahead and fill out the feedback form. We'll be receiving that electronically. And let us know if you've got any other questions that you might have. And please do email us at that email address. So any questions that people might have, please go ahead and ask.
We'll give everyone a minute to ask something in the chat, or also feel free to speak up. And I'm also pasting the feedback form in the chat now as well.
And there's two other exciting things that I want to sort of flag without having slides for them. So one of them is, and this is the special bonus to people who have listened this long. So the two things are we've got a bunch of updates that are coming to our website coming really soon. And so do sort of keep looking at our website and you'll start to see some of those things. If you're not subscribed to our mailing list, please do, because you'll start to get the notifications of the things like our website upgrades, new webinars that are coming, and keep really well informed. The other thing to watch out for on the mailing list, there's an announcement that I think will be made in the next couple of weeks, that maybe even in the next week, which will be really, really exciting, and some really big updates that are happening for Pegasus. And I think that, yeah, you really should stay out there. I won't go into any of the details yet. It's still being finalized, but I think there's a really, really, really sort of big, exciting announcement that is coming really soon for you all to watch out for.
I guess with that, any final questions? All right. Rob, Adrian, Josh, I think we're all set then. Thanks to everyone who's attended and stayed this long. Feel free to email us at the contact information at that slide. And Rob, I'll let you do the final sign off.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.